our group discussion, not a panel discussion. So our first speaker is going to be Molly Siegel. So Molly is the Maine Climate Council Coordinator with GoPIP. We also have Nick Batista from the Island Institute. Nick is the Chief Policy Officer there. We have Holly Stover. Holly is the representative for District 48. We also have Doug Beck, who's sitting over there. So he's the supervisor for the outdoor recreation program of the Bureau of Parks and Lands. And we also have Steve Lyons, who is the director for the Maine Office of Tourism. And I believe Steve is out of the room, but we'll be back in soon. Right. So Molly's gonna go first.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay in the room? Yes, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I can speak up if that's necessary. Just I need to understand what we're doing. Okay. So my name is Molly Siegel. I work for the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future with the Maine Climate Council, and I'm here to just do a little bit of a quick overview of some of the strategies related to climate resilience and adaptation, specifically in our state's climate action plan, and some of the steps that communities can take to take advantage of funding to protect the vital infrastructure in your community. So I have a couple of slides that I'll go through to just jog your memories around some of these issues. I'm sure most of you are not new to resilience and adaptation, and then hoping we can have a really robust discussion with some of the other folks. So as you probably know, our office runs the Maine Climate Council. It's this group of bipartisan state and local officials, as well as industry leaders and nonprofits and other folks who are concerned about climate in Maine and are working to update our state climate action plan for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to meet our emissions goals that are set in statute, as well as to adapt to climate change.
Sorry about that.
That'd be good.
Try it again. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so just a quick reminder of why we talk about climate adaptation and resilience in Maine. There are potential huge costs of damage from sea level rise and storm surges and lost building value, and just a whole host of other issues that will come with climate change. And so we're thinking about, in addition to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to mitigate climate change, our state is trying to be a leader and get out upfront on adapting to climate change and making our communities more resilient. Clicker is still not working. Oops.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, and we have a state climate action plan. It's called Manual Wave. I'm sure many of you have seen it, and there are a whole host of strategies in that plan that are related to how our state can become more resilient to climate change, particularly starting from communities. So just a couple of these recommendations are, number one, to empower local and regional community resilience efforts. The Climate Council also recommended adopting official sea level rise projections that are used in our state planning, emphasizing resilience through other land use planning and legal tools to strengthen public health monitoring, education, and prevention to prevent some of the health-related impacts from climate change. We also have strategies related to infrastructure. So making a concerted effort to assess the climate vulnerability of our infrastructure and provide design guidance to making our infrastructure ready for climate change. Another recommendation was to establish the state infrastructure adaptation fund, which we have done, to fund those sort of shovel-ready infrastructure projects that will be resilience. One of the major pieces of progress that has come out of the climate plan was the establishment of the Community Resilience Partnership, which is run through our office. So raise your hand if you live in or work for a town that is enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership. Awesome, that's great to see. It's had a really positive response across the state. I think folks have been really grateful for the opportunity to plan and receive grants for community resilience projects. We currently have 174 communities that are participating. Some of those are fully enrolled, and some are still working with service providers to enroll. And it's quick. If you have not already, you can join at any time. You can self-enroll or get help from service providers such as the Island Institute. Few quick steps to enroll. And that's the end of my presentation. So I think we can switch the slides off now. Yes. You want us to sit?
Yeah.
at the table now?
Oh, yeah. I think it's five. Here's the chair, I'm out of the game. I'm all done.
So good afternoon. My name is Holly Stover. I'm the state representative for House District 48. That includes the 6 coastal towns of Booth Bay Harbor, Southport, Edgecombe, Westport Island, and South Bristol. I think I have the prettiest district of all legislative districts. I'm pretty sure. And in preparing for today, I know you did housing this morning. First of all, I want to say that I am part of our community resiliency partnership down in the peninsula. And we are looking at storm surges and rising tides and the impact of our own environment. We have many assets. When you want to talk about amenities, we have hundreds of acres that are already starting back in the 80s. The Booth Bay Region Land Trust was formed, and we have preserved a lot of land that probably would have been developed, some of them in my backyard, had it not been for the formation of the land trust. So when you think about natural amenities, that's one of the things that our community has really benefited from. As a legislator, you know, we have so many things that we have to simultaneously pay attention to all the time. And some of the things, you know, we have to protect for instance, the land for Maine's future, to make sure that the funding is there so that we can continue to address environmental priorities. We have to continue to look at climate change and also the impact, the increased impact we could have on clean energy. And those ongoing debates. We certainly have spent a lot of money and a lot of time on PFAS, which is in all of our community. I think at this point, it certainly is in mine, and the ways in which we can mitigate that, because it does impact our way of life. And we have housing. And I want to talk a little bit about housing, even though I don't want to get into the weeds like you did earlier. But the legislature set aside a great deal of money in the last session, $70 million, to develop what is called affordable, which for those of us that live between Brunswick and Belfast, it's kind of a misnomer that it's affordable. So how do we do that? And I think some of that, we have to continue to look at local control and not look towards the legislature to usurp a lot of local control. There's been a lot of struggle with that, with one particular piece of legislation, LD 2003. I bet you talked about it this morning. I wasn't here. I was in work sessions in Augusta. How do we maintain local control and also look at structuring development to ensure that we have enough housing for people, because we know we don't. The most recent housing study for Maine housing showed that we do not. And how that affects coastal communities like ours is that we don't have people to do the jobs. And when we were planning for this conference, I said, does anybody remember that, you know, that Martin was talking probably 20 or 25 years ago about the bubble, big bubble of the boomers that were going to be heading out, and there wasn't going to be anybody to backfill these jobs, and nobody took it particularly serious. Everybody nodded at the conferences. Oh yeah, I see the bubble. Look at that bell curve. Well, here we are, and they're retired, and we don't have the backfill. But what we do have is a lot of really thriving industry in the Booth Bay area. We have Bigelow Labs, a world-renowned research laboratory that sits in East Booth Bay. And they do bring their workforce from all over the world, actually. And they built a dorm, and they're building a second one as part of their big additional expansion. And we have Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens. And it is a huge, I mean, people travel down that peninsula. If you've driven on Route 27, it's a testament to like the 350,000 people that travel on that road to come see the gardens. And that has been a significant economic boom. It's an economic driver for our part of the state. And how do we support that? And that industry with all of the other factors that we also want to protect, which is our environment, and develop our workforce and create housing. Because we're never gonna get the people to come to live in our area. And when I say our area, I'm thinking about the big mid-coast area. They're not gonna come live in the area if we don't have a place, affordable place to live. And we have some development. There was a housing study that was done that showed there are only 4 areas in Lincoln County where you can actually do it because we lack the public infrastructure to do it. And that's a real challenge for us. And those 4 areas were like Waldoboro, Damerscott, Newcastle, Booth Bay, and Wiscasset. But what we have to do is figure out how do we do that under those restrictions? We're currently planning for 160 unit development in Booth Bay, which will scratch the surface of what we need. We can't attract teachers. Our law enforcement, we have 50% of officers that we had 4 years ago. One of my day jobs, I work for the Booth Bay Harbor Police Department, and we have about 50% of our positions are vacant right now, and we can't fill them because we can't find any place for an officer to come live. And those are, when you think about up there in the slide earlier, it mentioned public health and public safety. Those are the kinds of things we have to think about in our small communities. Is if we don't have the basic amenities, people aren't going to want to come. We're struggling in Booth Bay to figure out we need $100 million to build a school and fix our elementary school, which got voted out last week, but we still have got to do it. We got to figure it out and how we're going to come up with $100 million because we need the school. In order to have the school, we've got to have housing to attract families to come and live in our community and work in the places. We thrive on hospitality, but we also are a working waterfront that thrives on lobster. The lobster industry is big for us, as well as all other fishing that's left. So they're complicated problems. I think that as a legislator, I've seen us do a number of initiatives over the past. I'm in my 3rd term. This is my 5th year, going into my 6th year. We've done a great job at some of it's been reclamation of a period of 8 years where we didn't do a great job. And we're trying to catch up. But how do we get to that next level? And I think that one of the strongest things we can do as mid-coast communities to strengthen our workforce is to develop housing because the jobs are there. We have incredible industries. If you think about what we do in our communities, we just need to find a way to attract and keep people and have it be a safe environment to be in, to address the things that we can and to mitigate the things that are the biggest threats to our future. Stop there. Thank you.
Nick, you want to? Sure. Hello, Nick Batista, Chief Policy Officer at the Island Institute. I see many familiar faces out there, but for those of you who don't know, Island Institute's a 40-year-old community development organization. We're located in Rockland, Maine. We recently reorganized our work into 3 different centers, and I'll talk a little bit about that and a little bit about some of the work that might be interesting or helpful or relevant for this group in this conversation, and then a little bit about working waterfronts, because that's what I like to talk about. So we have 3 centers. We have the Center for Climate and Community, we have the Center for Maine's Marine Economy, and we have the Center for Sustainable Communities. And those are really the 3 different areas that we're focusing on as an organization. A little bit of work to highlight for this group, broadband. When we think about this part of the coast and we think about what makes these communities attractive or not attractive, the presence of a high quality internet connection, the ability to have fiber to your house is a huge game changer now, and it will be even more so in the future. Island Institute is the regional and tribal broadband partner for the Maine Connectivity Authority for Hancock and Waldo counties. Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission is working further south. MCOG is helping us greatly in Waldo County. So if you're a Waldo County community here, 80 is a good resource if you're not already connected. Another piece of work, Molly mentioned it, is our work on climate. And so we're helping communities with clean energy transitions, mostly the offshore island communities or very remote communities. We're also a service provider for the Community Resilience Partnership Program. Happy to talk about that work if your community is interested in it. Happy to talk about sea level rise work more broadly if you're interested in tackling that. We have 3 staff involved in the Maine Climate Council process, on the Community Resilience Working Group, on the Coastal Marine Working Group, and Susie Arnold sits on the Climate Council. She's our marine scientist, and she also co-chairs the Science and Technical Subcommittee. The last piece of our climate work that's worth mentioning, we do a lot of work around climate translation. And so we know the Gulf of Maine is really important to the coastal communities, particularly in the mid-coast. There's a strong connection between the health of the Gulf of Maine and the health of our communities. And so the changes that are happening in the Gulf of Maine as an ecosystem impact our communities today, and understanding what those changes are, where those trends are going, can help inform pathways forward for the future. And so Susie does a bunch of great science translation work about the latest state of knowledge of the ecosystem of the Gulf of Maine, what's changing, how fast it's changing. Short story is it's changing quickly. The other 2 pieces of work to highlight, we're supporting the growth of shellfish and seaweed aquaculture as an economic diversification for coastal communities. Would encourage you, if you haven't gotten out to see a kelp harvest or to see an oyster farmer working, to try to find opportunities to do so. We'll be working to provide some of those opportunities over the coming year. If you're interested, let me know. We'd love to get you out. From where we sit at the Island Institute, it's an important part of the future of many of our coastal communities, and it's a growth area for people who want to continue to work on the water. There are other growth areas too, but we think those are shellfish and seaweed aquaculture are key growth areas. The last organizational plug to make is we have an Island Institute Fellows program. If you're not aware of it, these are 2-year fellowship programs that are embedded in a community, working on a community driven project and supported by the community. We are in the fellows recruitment process for a fellow who would start next fall. And it's exciting. Among this group, we have 3 former Island Institute fellows in the room. We've got Andy over there. And so, if you have somebody who wants to be like Andy when they grow up, you'll be an Island Institute fellow, and Dan and Molly are also former fellows. And so just a little bit on working waterfronts, and we'll maybe touch on this more in the discussion, but our working waterfronts and our sense of the needs of working waterfronts and our knowledge about working waterfronts along the coast of Maine has changed significantly since 2020. We sat down as a group, as the statewide Working Waterfront Coalition, and started to document some of these changes and some of the pressures facing working waterfronts. It is a different landscape than it was in 2019. There have been 5 reports recently that have documented all of these changes or started to document them. There's a great toolkit out there from the Maine Coast Fishermen's Association that can help communities understand some of their working waterfronts. Monique in the back there, be a good person to talk to about that. Can you? There's all of the pressures that I think you talked about earlier, and don't have to tell you about all of the pressures on the land side in these communities, from gentrification to housing to workforce shortages, all of the things that you're dealing with in these communities on a daily basis, they're also impacting working waterfronts. The important thing to note about working waterfronts is they're also impacted by a whole bunch of changes on the water. And some of those are the changes in the ecosystem in the Gulf of Maine. Some of those are changes in the fish stocks that live in the Gulf of Maine, or the ability to catch those fish stocks. So there's big changes coming in the lobster fishery in the next year or so because of the health of the lobster stock. there are also changes coming from other regulatory processes. And so I think, you know, in the mid-coast, we are really, this group plus Hancock County is the epicenter for the parts of Maine that are going to be impacted significantly in 5 years by changes to regulations that will protect right whales. And we've done all of the easy things that we can do as a lobster industry. We've taken all of the easy steps that we can take to reduce risk to right whales. We know in 5 years, we'll have to have another set of regulations to protect right whales. What those look like, how big of a change those will be, those are both unknowns. It's very likely that the changes will be somewhere between substantial and bigger than we really want to be thinking about. And so I think, you know, we're looking at working waterfronts as being a very critical piece of infrastructure for coastal communities to maintain and work on and support in the next few years to make sure that if we hit a big bump in 5 years due to these whale rules, we'll be able to maintain that economic connection between coastal communities and the water. That if we can protect our working waterfronts today, if we can work to support them and sustain them, maybe they don't become hotels, maybe they don't leave the business environment. Maybe they get to stay working waterfronts, and then they're available, there's options for the future. And so I think, you know, I would just keep that, we have 5 years from just about now to do all that we can do until we're going to hit big changes. And those changes are coming.
Hi. Doug Beck, Bureau of Parks and Lands, Outdoor Recreation Supervisor. What does that mean? It means I run a couple of grant programs, basically. I run the Land and Water Conservation Fund and the Recreation Trails Program. The Maine Conservation Corps is also in my portfolio. So I can help you create an amenity trap in your community by finding lots of outdoor recreation. So if you're interested, let me know. Truth be told, probably nearly everybody here has either an RTP project or a land and water project already in your community. You just don't know it. Land and water program, how many of you know? Well, I'll just tell you. Land and water program has been around since 1965. It was a beautiful idea from Congress when they worked a little better together. And they understood that there were public resources being extracted from the Gulf of Mexico in the form of oil and gas extraction. So there was perceived to be a crisis in the 60s of diminishing landscape. And so Congress established the Land and Water Conservation Fund to develop to siphon off a portion of the lease revenues from the oil and gas leases in the Gulf of Mexico and put it into a fund. And that fund was called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Maine has participated in that since the beginning. We are close to getting 1,000 projects across the state. If you haven't been to it yet, and you don't know whether you have a land and water project in your community, I would encourage you to go to the BPL website and look for the grants and program.
Down the house down.
I know it.
Land and water is so exciting.
Land and water is so exciting.
They just don't want you to know about this website. That was unexpected.
Just want to make sure everyone's staying awake.
Yeah, the coffee's just not giving it to people now.
I just got lots, that's all I did. I saved that mug.
Thank you. I've had that for 10 years. I really
wow.
All done.
So about that website.
So about that, If you go to the Grants and Community Recreation Program, there will be a Land and Water Conservation Fund link. And if you follow that link, you'll be able to find the GIS layer, which was created 3 years ago now, maybe. I had a couple of Maine Conservation Corps environmental stewards working to digitize the 57-year history of the Land and Water Program. And put all of it, whenever there's a land and water project, there's a project boundary that's created. The area within that boundary has to be maintained for public outdoor recreation forever. So it's important to know where these places are. And if you go to that website, you'll be able to see the polygons of these projects that exist in your community or wherever you want to look. And if you look at there's a little light bulb in the middle of each polygon, or somewhere in the polygon. You click on that, it will tell you when the project was awarded, what it was for, and how much the town received. And it doesn't matter how much you receive, but once that funding is received, the boundary is created, and you have to maintain that forever. So the Land and Water Program is it is called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So you can use that to acquire and develop land for public outdoor recreation. And the development doesn't have to be, so you'll look across the landscape and there'll be a lot of municipal playgrounds and even school facilities, but it's also 22,000 acres of the Allagash Wilderness Waterway. So it ranges across the spectrum of opportunities to acquire and develop outdoor space, open space. The Recreation Trails Program is a kid next to the next to Land and Water. That's only been around since the early 90s. That's federal highway money, and it's a portion of the, it's a calculation of the portion of the fuel tax from purchases of petroleum that fund off-road vehicles. How's that? And Maine gets 1.4 million annually in RTP. We get 2.4 million, 2.5 to 2.6 million in land and water. The people that I do nationally are trying to convince Congress that the way they're calculating the land and water program is incorrect. And they should put a different fund that came later on top of what our formula funding is. If that happened, and I can give you details, I won't bore you now, but if that happened, then Maine would get up to $4 million annually for investments in public outdoor recreation, land, water conservation. Currently, as of this moment, I'm sitting on a balance of about $6 million in land and water conservation funding, and a balance, I've got an anticipated, again, I can tell you, we can get weedy together, and I can tell you how this has happened. But I'm going to have about $3 million next year in RTP. So 2024 would be a good year to apply for grants for investments in public outdoor recreation. Unlike land and water, the RTP program has no perpetual stewardship obligations, and the RTP program can also benefit virtually anybody who has trails that are open to the public. Virtually anybody. You can't be an individual. We're not going to build a trail in your backyard. But if you're an organization in the state of Maine and you have permission to develop or maintain trails, RTP can help you do that. A lot of the RTP money over the past decades have gone into then funded Maine Conservation Corps trail crews to help the community build or renovate the trails. So it's really a one-stop shopping for outdoor recreation infrastructure. And it's, I like to point out that it's been around longer than LMF, and it's underappreciated, I think, in what it's done for the state. We've put land and water funding into almost all of the state parks. All of the, I think it's 37 state parks that have campsites have benefited from the land and water program. So it's an incredible asset. And again, it's in most of the municipalities, certainly the larger municipalities in Maine, and many in the mid-coast region. So it's, I'm happy to help you appreciate more about what RTP and Land and Water and MCC could do. And here to answer any other questions if I can.
My next, I guess. My name's Steve Lyons. I'm director of the Maine Office of Tourism. The Maine Office of Tourism is obviously charged, hence the name, with marketing the state as a tourism destination. We have 8 tourism regions in the state of Maine, Mid-Coast being one of them, and the Mid-Coast in this case, based on how we break the state out, is basically from about Brunswick up to the Penobscot Narrows Bridge. So essentially that's where the Mid-Coast covers that area. It's a huge industry. Tourism is a huge industry in the state of Maine. Direct expenditures in 2022 were about $8.5 billion. Billion dollars, sorry, put the B on there. $8.5 billion. And the total economic impact for the state of Maine is about $15 billion annually. So it's a very large industry. We cover our responsibilities in addition to marketing the state. We do that through, we have to manage the visitor information centers, the state-owned centers that are in the state. There's seven of those. We have marketing research programs, so we do a lot of annual reports based on, visitation, where people are coming from, what their interests are, what they're doing when they're here, what they're planning, how long it takes them to plan. It's a pretty intensive survey. We do that through a research firm that actually comes and does intercept studies here in the state, and then supplements that with some online surveys as well. But so we're actually out in the regions every year, pretty much all year round. We are out collecting data from visitors who are here enjoying the state. Last year we had about 15.5 million visitors come to the state of Maine. That number's kind of been relatively flat over the last couple of years, but what's increasing is that the room nights are increasing. So the number of nights people are staying overnight in accommodations is increasing. And the direct expenditures are increasing year over year. So basically it means we have a few fewer people spending more and staying longer is what it boils down to, which is a good path forward for us. We are working on a destination management plan. We introduced that at the Governor's Conference on Tourism back in earlier this year in the spring. What that destination management plan is to focus on how do you keep Maine to be a sustainable destination. Historically, most destination marketing organizations, which is what we are on the state level, have been focused on let's get visitation, let's get volume, let's get more people here. That trend is sort of changing. That philosophy is changing among a lot of people. It's not about the volume of people you get, but it's the quality of people you get and the types of things they want to do. Our goal with the destination management plan is to invite visitors here and do it in a sustainable manner. And we want to welcome everyone. The destination management plan focuses on diversifying our audience, and diversity meaning, not just ethnicity and race, but it also means LGBTQ, it means people with disabilities, it means a lot of different things. How do we improve that? Right now, 90% of the visitation to Maine is white. The population around the country is changing. We need to change with that if we want to be competitive in the marketplace. We have marketing agency that we work with that does all the advertising out of state. Our primary markets are really the northeastern United States, New England, mid-Atlantic states, but we are starting to reach out to other parts of the country with some marketing campaigns down as far as like Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, down to Florida, out into Chicago. Because historically we've focused pretty much on the northeastern US, and about 85% of our visitation is drive market. So one of the things we'd like to do is see more visitors flying in, because what that does, if you fly here, if you have a plan to come to Maine from across the country, you're more likely to stay if the weather goes south. We had a lot of rain earlier this year. The season started off a little slow, but it did pick up, and we did come back by the end of the year, by the end of the summer. But that's the challenge. The bulk of our visitation is coming from Boston area. So they can look at the weather forecast and say, yeah, I guess I might, maybe I won't go today. It looks like it's gonna be rainy up there this weekend. So whereas if you're traveling here from Florida, if you're traveling here from California, if you're from overseas, you're more likely to want to, come even if your the weather isn't as favorable as you'd like it to be. The Mid-Coast region itself, we do research reports for each of the 8 tourism regions in the state. In the Mid-Coast region, last year, there were about 2 million visitors, a little more than 2 million visitors to the area. And your room nights are about 1.6 million. That was actually a pretty significant increase in room nights over year to year. Expenditures in the mid-coast region that I described is about $1 billion a year, but that's direct expenditures on things like shopping, restaurants, lodging, transportation, groceries, those kinds of things. About $1 billion a year just in this region. That compares pretty favorably with the other regions. It's a little behind. It's very close to the Down East Acadia region, which is anything past the Penobscot Narrows Bridge, basically Washington and Hancock County. It's not quite as much as what we get down in the greater Portland area or what we see down the Maine Beaches region, which is all, Cumberland County, I'm sorry, York County, essentially. So as we move forward with the program, with the destination management plan, diversity is one key, but also spreading people out around the state. The bulk of the visitation does come to the coastal regions of the state. We try to promote, we are required to, and we do the best job we can to promote the rest of the state. The challenge is to find the right people that want to come to, the inland regions. Most people, when they think of Maine, their first perception that pops into their head is, oh, it's you got a great coastline. You got 5,300 miles or 3,500 miles of coastline. So we want to go there. I'm from Vermont originally, and we used to come to Maine for vacation to go to every week. We'd spend a week in York or Wells every single year, and we had no interest whatsoever in going anywhere else because we were from Vermont and we lived in the mountains of Lake, so we didn't need to do it. So we're trying to spread people out around the state as much as possible, get them to the areas that aren't as well traveled, but we're doing so in a sustainable way. We have some stewardship principles in our destination management plan that are, the plan itself can be found on our industry website, which is motpartners.com. Anyone can go look at that. It's an extensive plan that it talks about geography, it talks about diversification. One of the things we're also trying to do is to promote guided experiences more than sort of the do-it-yourself experience. And so curated and guided experiences are something that you see in a lot of other states. A lot of times you can't go I was out in Utah earlier this year, and it's like, if you're going to go on an ATV trip, you basically go with an outfitter of some kind. You don't just take your ATV and go out in the woods necessarily. There are people who do that, but they have a large outfitter population in other states like Utah, like Colorado, and some of the others. So those are important aspects as well. That's kind of an overview of the state and what we do. I'll be here answer any questions that I can as well. So.
Thank you all. I was worried that the housing institute had set the bar too high, and yeah, picked a good group for this afternoon. So this is supposed to be a group discussion. So I'm just gonna pose a question, and hopefully it'll get the ball rolling and people aren't too tired. But one of the question is, what makes your community or the Mid-Coast region special, and what amenities do we need to protect in order to maintain this sense of place? Anybody want to jump in and offer an answer to that question? I'm asking the audience, sorry.
I would say access to the water is extremely important, especially the ocean trails, places to access the water to both see it and to experience it. So our state parks are critically important. Spent a lot of time in summer at Ocean Beach, the Root Point State Park. It's those sorts of places, I think, that are a major enhancement and major reason people are here, either living or visiting.
Can I jump in on and answer that? When we think about working waterfronts, we often think about floats or docks or piers, but one of the really important parts of working waterfront access for the state are all of those little paths down to the clam flats that the clammers use. And as our coastal population changes, and as those paths get closed because somebody doesn't want a clammer or a worm walking down their path, they're losing that opportunity for economic activity, the way some of our licensing systems work, the way that we regulate some of these industries. If we're pushing clammers out of communities, pricing them out of the housing market, and they don't have access, it's a really hard to make a living. And so I think when I think about some of the amenities for this community, it's that we're close to people who are working for a living, and it's one of the few places where you can go and you can see somebody working and working hard to make a living, whether they're clamming or pulling lobsters over the dock.
So there's a couple of examples where land, water, and RTP have played a role in maintaining access. So Alped Harbor Park, now it's Dicava Harbor Park. But there was a working waterfront there. Ownership changed. The owners were not real keen on having public access and public use of the pier. So Dick Harbor, a local community member, rallied the troops to apply for a land water conservation grant that conserved and developed a public access park immediately adjacent to where the town had been using the commercial park. So now it's a public access, a beautiful accessible pier, which is pretty dramatic. Dredged out the area for boat access on the harbor, an amazing project, all in the mid-coast. And then just around the corner down in St. George, there's a interesting project that RTP's been involved in, where there's this really narrow corridor that goes down to, there's a number of different terms for it, but Fort St. George or Fort George's. I think that if I kept talking to the parks people about, well, we've got a project in St. George down to Fort George's or whatever. And they were like, yeah, that's up in like Searsport, right? I said, no, it's in St. Thomas, it's in St. George. Anyway, so the RTP program is developing an accessible trail. There's a spring there by the road, a really narrow corridor. But the town started with an accessible trail, and then we're like, well, why build an accessible trail to an inaccessible state park, that Fort area? So they're finishing that project up this fall, but it's going to be an amazing, really accessible in both ways in terms of proximity to the population, but really enhancing access to the coast in an otherwise really inaccessible way. So everybody would be able to come down there, and in a short walk with Grandma and Grandpa and the kids, you can be out and see this beautiful coastal experience. There's a lot more stories like that, but that's some of the ways that RTP and Land and Water can play a role in conserving coastal access.
Max, is anybody online have a question?
I don't have any questions online just yet, but I'll let you know when I do have something.
How about cultural amenities too? We are rich in cultural amenities. You're sitting in one of them. Here in Thompson, we've got Watts Hall. We just got grant money. We'll be spending $1 billion upgrading this facility over the next 2 years. But this is one of dozens of opera houses, museums, cultural institutions that are a huge attraction to people.
Steve, you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, Maine does, you're right, Chris. I mean, Maine does have all these cultural attractions, and there are people now that are, the trend in the industry now for people that are traveling is they want to go to a community and they want to sort of become a part of the community. They want to understand what the locals are doing. They want to, go to the local brew pub or go to the local restaurant, go to, stay in a local lodging property, do some shopping for local products. And so having the local cultural amenities is also a benefit there. We actually saw a little bump in the cultural amenities this year, I think because of the earlier wet weather we had before going to more museums this year. But I mean, the thing about Maine, what's interesting about Maine is, there's this history here, this arts history in the state of Maine that, when the industry sort of grew up out of, back in the 1800s, and the industry was kind of growing up out of sort of nothing, didn't exist. One of the reasons it became popular is because of all the artists in the state who were coming here from the cities, and they were painting the coastal sceneries or whatever it was. And so then all of a sudden they bring that art back to the cities, and all the Astors and the Fords and the Vanderbilts and all those families who saw these things, were then saying, wow, that looks great, we ought to go there. And so suddenly, the industry started to grow. So one of the reasons, it's always interesting when we talk about Maine, we have very deep cultural experience here. You know, you go to a small theater, whether it's the Gunkwit Playhouse or Deer Trees Theater or one of these, you know, some of these places around the state that get some really talented travelers. You know, I mean, really talented people that work there, and it's almost understated to some degree. You know, it's you know, people think about New York City and Broadway and that kind of thing, but they don't necessarily think about summer stock theater here in the state of Maine someplace, you know. But it is such a huge industry in this state and an important attraction as well.
Yeah, actually, just to tag onto that, I think that there's something that separates mid-coast from other parts of Maine that's not, you know, maybe sort of a tourist attraction, but not really. I think it's more of like something that attracts, that keeps Mainers in the mid-coast, is sort of this, this tradition of arts and like this fierce independence, and like, we're gonna do this ourselves, and we're going to, you know, I think you get that with the Back to the Landers. I think you get that with the working waterfront folks, sort of all across the board. But I think also something is like, mid-coast Maine has this rich history of traditional Maine fiddle music that really overlaps with like the working class history. You know, a lot of the, you know, you have Atlantic Challenge in the Belfast area that's very much tied into this like Maine fiddle music scene. You have a lot of the like aquaculture people in the Bodenham region that are really tied into this music scene, and it's something that sort of flies under the radar that I think most tourists don't really get to see, but is also something that really keeps, you know, the communities that I work with, and you know, we see, you know, they're always saying we don't want to be like Portland and Southern Maine, and there's a real distinction there, and I think it's that like that fierce independence and this creativeness that sort of, you know, previously mid-coast Maine was more affordable, and you had more of those artists and the you know, independent workers who are cobbling together several different seasonal jobs, and we still have that history.
Yeah, I mean, Maine, you know, some of the more popular people are coming here for the historic sites and the museums, to this, you know, on the mid-coast. You know, and food is huge in this, actually, food is the most popular activity for people when they're coming to mid-coast, more so than other regions. A lot of times you hear about Portland being the foodie capital and all that kind of thing, but you know, it's the number one reason people come to this region of the state. And I think a lot of it is because you have all these little peninsulas. You can go down all these little peninsulas, and each one has a personality of its own, and you can get different foods and have different experiences as you go down each of these different peninsulas. And you know, that's what people are looking for. They want something that's off the beaten path and something they can, you know, put on their Facebook page or social media page or whatever and brag, oh, I went to this place, I found this off the beaten path place. And that's what people are doing now. It's almost a social media competition now for people out there to find the place that nobody else has found and brag about it and say, hey, I did this. And you know, and then what that does, it then drives more visitation for everybody who's following them, and you know, then everyone else looks for that off the beaten path place to, you know,
And becomes a beaten path.
yeah, and it becomes a beaten path, which because that's, and herein lies the challenge, and that's, you know, that's where our destination plan comes in. You know, we're watching that very carefully. I mean, the park, you talked about the parks earlier, the parks in this part of the state, in the mid-coast region of the state, are the busiest, you know, parks, you know, for day visitation in the state. I mean, Popham Beach is crazy busy, we all know. Reed State Park is really high. You know, Camden Hills is you know, has a lot of visitation. So it is a challenge to, you know, how do you maintain the essence of these facilities, you know, by, you know, when you have so many, when hundreds of thousands of people coming every year. You know I've tried to go to Popham Beach and it's just been closed basically because it's already packed to the gills. And so, you know, that's where we're trying to find, working with the other regions of the state. You know, we don't want to necessarily steal business from one place and give it to another, but we want to balance it out as best we can, you know, and try to get people to think about all the different destinations around the state as they're planning their trip.
And
I think what she said was very important about Mainers. We define ourselves to some extent by who we don't want to be. You know, Rockland doesn't want to be Camden, and Camden doesn't want to be Boothbay, and nobody wants to be like Bar Harbor. I mean, it's that kind of, we do like to think we're special and what it is about us that's special. And we define it sometimes in what we don't want to be, rather than what we want to be. And I think that's gonna be a hard thing for a lot of towns to grab onto when you talk about the future, is who do we want to be, not who we don't want to be.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that. We were up in Machias, Calais, Eastport, and Beck earlier this year, and we were helping them with a tourism plan for the area. And the first thing came out of the mouth, well, we don't want to be Bar Harbor, you know. And so my response to them was, well, I don't want you to be Bar Harbor either, because that's what people want to come here for, that different experience. They get the Bar Harbor experience in Bar Harbor, but they can't get the Eastport experience in Bar Harbor. And so how do you maintain that experience and make sure that that is you know, protected so that it doesn't become overrun with visitors? So how you manage that is the challenge. And I don't know if we have the answer to that yet, but you know, that's what we're trying to strive for.
Well, what made Bar Harbor become what it is today?
Well, Bar Harbor, as I was saying before, it's mostly because that's where the rich and famous were. The artists came up, they started painting pictures of the place. You know, the Rockefeller suddenly said, oh, well, that's great. And then all those rich people started buying summer cottages or building summer cottages, you know, the 4,000 square foot summer cottages or whatever up in the area. And so that's the history of that area, is that all these rich people from the cities would come up, and in order to escape, after they learned about it through the artists, all the paintings and the people that were in the readings, you know, if they had about the area and understanding the area, they started to build their houses up here. They would bring their families up for you know, the summer, because to beat the heat in New York. You didn't have air conditioning back in the 1800s, you know, and so so they wanted to beat the heat in the cities. They'd come up here where they could walk and be out in the pathways, and they could be out in the forests. And it was a sort of, they see it sort of a healing process to come up here, and you know, felt like it was healthy getaway for them. And that's how it really started. And then people started to build on that and build hotels and restaurants and things as well.
Can I ask you a question of the group?
Absolutely.
All right. I'm curious how many, or whether this group has seen a lot of people moving into their community coming from places that are being impacted by climate change, and explicitly saying they're coming here because we have a better climate, or we're tackling climate change, or something in that realm. And I know there's a set of COVID refugees, but in the climate side, is that something people are seeing or hearing or talking about?
Yes.
I will say that the Boothbay region, we've had a lot of people move in. And you know, when you serve in the legislature, you get to go out every 2 years and knock on just about everybody's door. And I met a lot of people who came from Texas and Florida. They said it was about climate. And they just wanted to get out, and that it wasn't any fun anymore. And that summer wasn't enjoyable, to your point. They were like, because here in the summer, I always get warmer, but it can't always get cool, right? In Texas and Florida, there was no joy. There's no lawn unless you spend a lot of money irrigating it. There's no outdoor recreation. So I met people, partly they were COVID refugees, but they decided to stay. I met a lot of fascinating people who work for large corporate industries, who work remotely and fly out to their companies around the country once or twice a month. So it certainly has. And it's also, I mean, one of the things for our part of the mid-coast is there's a real culture shift happening with who's buying homes. And, you know, historically, you know, we had hospitality always as part of our industry, but we were fishing. We were fishing, a large and boat building. That was our identity. When I was growing up, that's what we were about. We were a lot about fishing, a lot about lobstering, and a lot about boat building. And we still do those things. But those things are all, for a variety of reasons, under threat. And we're changing because of remote work, because of changes, you know, broadband access. We're seeing a whole bunch of people move in. they don't necessarily have children or school-age children. We're in, as I mentioned earlier, we're struggling about what to do with our schools, not just our schools, but if you look at Lincoln County, we're struggling with the numbers of children that we actually have coming up through our schools in Lincoln County, and who are we, and what's our identity? When your identity starts to shift, whether that's about lobstering, which that's a factor, whether it's about boat building, because there's been changes, we still have a thriving boat building business. But it begins to change your identity about who you are and what you do. Certainly tourism is for us is a growth, continual growth opportunity. And we are a big foodie place now, which is exciting. But who are we as a culture is really, you can feel some of it as, because I sort of straddle between two canoes because I represent a lot of people, but I'm also a native, who's based my hometown. So people talk to me, and they say, where am I supposed to live in 10 years? If they keep coming and they keep buying up everything, where am I supposed to go? There's this real perceived threat. I think it's a perceived threat. I don't know how realistic it is that they think that there's not going to be room for them anymore. And as a community, that's a real struggle. As a person, that's a real struggle. When you talk to somebody who worked their whole lives and, he worked at BIW and she did housekeeping seasonally, and they have this 1 acre, and they've got this house they built when they first got married, and they think they're gonna have to leave. And how do you break through those sort of, whether they're misbeliefs or not, how do you break through that and have that conversation? The threat they feel is property tax. They're gonna be taxed out, they're gonna be costed out, that big people are gonna come and just consume everything, and then there's not going to be a place. And when you talk about amenities, you can add all these things, but when it's true to the heart of the culture, which is, where are we talking about culture? Over here, true to, we have strong Irish, Scottish roots in my community. And it was a lot of the foundation, which had a strong independence. We did take care of ourselves. One of my grandfathers was a fisherman and the other one was a farmer. And they were independent as could be because they relied on what they could do to provide. It's just a real shift for us. And I don't think we're an anomaly. I don't think the Boutte region is alone in that. I think there's a lot of that up and down the coast, in little tiny towns, where people feel, whether that's real or perceived, a threat around them, that things are going to shift so dramatically that they don't fit in. And I don't know what we do about that.
I like how you mentioned the perception, what people are feeling versus what is happening. And I think the data does bear this out, that we're seeing an influx of people actually moving full-time into the state. I was just seeing some data from the state economist office about this, and we have some real data to show what types of people are moving into the state, and it is a lot more high-income people right now who I think COVID, remote work. So those are the patterns that we've seen so far. At the same time, we have a massive need. We actually do need an influx of people into our state to fill jobs. So we do have, as a state, a need to actually increase the number of residents. Otherwise, we won't have a functioning economy. We need to make sure that we're supporting those to be the types of residents that are keeping communities going. So I think there's sort of a narrative shift that will help, to at one time become more welcoming to greater diversity and an influx of people that might be able to fill some of these jobs that are really essential. So it's kind of both. How do we make the communities more welcoming to an influx of people while also recognizing that right now the pattern is kind of trending in the wrong direction. So I really like, what you brought up about climate migration as well. We actually don't have a lot of good data on climate migration. It's all anecdotal right now. Talking to people who are hearing that that's why people are moving. Nobody has been able to really prove that out. That's a conversation that's going on in our community resilience working group right now. So a couple of folks in the room are in that group. And I think there needs to be more of an effort around the sort of land use planning that comes along with climate migration. We're seeing, the asylum seekers on one side and then this other type of climate migration. It's really interesting, and these conversations are happening in relation to climate and resilience. So I think something will sort of emerge from the current climate process that gets at this issue, but it is worth continuing to push out because nobody has accurate data on climate migration right now.
Yeah, well, if we're looking for amenities as to why people might move here, one of the things that struck me is that people seem, at least in my town, small population, people seem to move here because they have access to their government in a municipal way, which they may not have had in Boston, Portland, wherever. And that's a big draw. You can control, well, not control, but I mean, you can influence the school board, how your kids are gonna grow, et cetera, et cetera. Or you can show up town, part of it's, they're buying into the Newhart, Vermont, Beck. You know, New England town hated, but it's a real thing. But it's also a challenge that's disappearing. It's getting harder and harder and harder for people to show up through the traditional channels. Because you don't do town meeting by social media.
I would add to that, it's not just our local governments that are highly accessible, but I think our
Yeah.
state legislators are very accessible. And state agencies are incredibly accessible. When we look at what we have here in Maine and the number of people who interact regularly with the commissioners, the number of fishermen who text Beck Kelleher, who's the DMR commissioner, and share their thoughts with him, the number of people who give Hannah a call and share their thoughts about what we're doing on climate change, it's high and they're very accessible. And I think that's a underrated part of Maine, is that accessibility of government at all levels and their responsiveness to constituent concerns.
I would agree, and I can tell you, I just want to put a plug in for state government, because I get an array of requests weekly from, it could be just about anything under the sun. If I write to somebody, and it doesn't matter whether it's DAPS or DECD, or doesn't matter what department, immediately, somebody will grab it, they'll assign it to somebody who's actually doing it. For those of you in the room who work in state government, I apologize, but I mean, it happens because there's still a smallness to a government, there's still a smallness to community. And we can plug together and get answers for people relatively quickly, and that's a very different experience from what people have in other parts of the country. We're still able to get people pretty quick information.
It might not be an answer that makes everybody happy, but at least
Sometimes
it's an
we
answer.
do, but you get the answer.
Monique?
I completely agree with that. We actually talked a little bit about it at lunch too. I was previously on the comprehensive planning committee in Hartsville. And I tell fishermen all the time, like, if you want to see impact more quickly, a great way to do that is get involved with your municipality. I think though, thinking about all the obstacles that we've also talked about today, there are some challenges in that. One of my issues with the comp plan is they were hosting their meetings at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's really hard for working families. It's much easier for people to retire to join committees. It's a great way if you're like a new resident in the community, you want to meet people, like joining committees, which is again fantastic, but there are some like obstacles with that, challenges. We don't know the like traditional industries or the culture. So just taking into consideration some of the obstacles we talked about today, like there's a balance that needs to go there as well.
No questions online.
One other thing I want to mention about Maine, and I know it may sound out of place, given that we just experienced, mass casualty and shooting in Lewiston. But by and large, if you look at the data, Maine is a very safe place. Has always been traditionally a very safe place. And I think when we think about amenities and people wanting to be here, it is still a place where you can leave your car running and run into the store. Not that you should. That's bad. It's bad for the environment. But I'm just saying, you can leave your door unlocked. You can. There's certain things you do. You can leave your bike out in the yard. There's things that we do here that we take for granted that we could never do if we lived in some other places. And I hope we don't lose that. I think we lost a lot of our innocence 3 weeks ago around that. But I hope that in places where we can still retain it, where somebody does leave the keys to their truck, they go, oh, the key to my truck, it's just there in the console, take my truck. So that we don't lose that part of Maine that we've been all very comfortable with.
Yeah,
I
we-
just, something to consider when you think about hospitality, or even when you think about environment, you don't think about going on a trail. You know, the trails are by my house, and I don't think about those things that I might if I lived in a different place.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we see that with international travelers in particular, in that there are a lot of places in the United States they don't want to go because they see that they feel they're not safe, you know, but New England has a reputation in general for being a much more safer place to go. That in the Midwest, or generally, except the big cities, you know, are safe places to go. So we do see that as well with international travelers.
I do see tourists in the summer that say, more than once have mentioned, you people talk to everybody. Like, you're very friendly, like, and, I think that's a good thing. Like, the things that we have, that we shouldn't lose, is our ability to reach out to people and just strike up a conversation.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you look at the research data that we have. Every one of the questions we ask, would you return, and that kind of thing. Like 97% of the people want to return to Maine after they've been here. And when we talk to our research firms who do this work for other people around the country, they're like, that's high, you know, that's really high. So we do have something special here for sure.
Just can't all move here tomorrow.
We'll build them houses.
What?
We got jobs.
Any other questions or comments? I have a question for Steve. When I was looking at visitor research, it mentioned that visitors, Maine visitors, whose principal destination is another region, that the Mid-Coast region is actually the number one other place that they visit while they're here. And it was, and as I recall, the percentage was almost double any other region. And I was wondering if you could speak to that, like,
Well,
what might,
yeah, I mean, I probably have, in all my notes, I probably have that somewhere, but
it sort of jumped out at me.
yeah, my first reaction is, you're on Route 1. You know, and so anyone going up to down east, or, you know, if you're in the Portland area, you can get up here. So, you know, and a lot of the visitors are going to down east because they're going to Getty National Park, you know. So you're going to get that as one factor. I'm not saying that's the only factor, but I do have one of my hundreds of sheets here. I do have a note on, you know, it is a popular place to go. We're working with a new company now that allows us to track these things a little more different, or a little different. It's a little different. We haven't launched it yet, but you know, we'll be able to track, you know, where people are going from region to region. And usually what we're looking at now used to be, as if you pass through a region, you're counted as a visitor there, even if you're just driving along Route 1 or whatever. But now there's kind of with people's cell phones, you can track and determine, well, if that phone was in the Mid-Coast for 2 hours or more now, we use that as sort of our benchmark for a visit, you know, if you're there for 2 hours or more. And it's amazing how much data you can get, not personal data, but amazing you can get with cell phones now. And, you know, if a cell phone is normally in San Francisco and suddenly it's in Maine for 5 days, and then it's back in San Francisco, well, you know, you had visitors from San Francisco, you know, but it's interesting that, you know, I think its proximity is, you know, you're Portland one side, down east the other, which are both very popular destinations. So, you know, I think it's easy to get to both of those places and get the Mid-Coast as well. But I'd have to look at the data more carefully to see and analyze it more closely to see what the other impacts would be, or why the other reasons for that are.
Got stuck in a 2-hour traffic jam.
And was gas it?
No, they wanted
They
to.
red seats. They were stalled at red.
Right.
Should be a leader.
It is unfortunate about Maine, though, that, so I involved in a couple national associations, and people say, oh, you're from Maine, I love Maine, I've been to Maine. I said, what did you do? Well, we flew into Portland, we spent a couple days in Portland, we drove up Route 1 to Acadia, and then we came back and flew away. Like, you missed most of the state of Maine. But that's, you know, that's Maine.
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges you have there is a lot of the visitors that we're attracting are for urban or suburban areas. So if you're trying to get someone to go to say, somewhere up in the Maine Highland region, up by Katahdin, get them on a dirt road and that they get the
Freak out.
heebie-jeebies, it's like, I had a meeting with the president of the Sporting Camps Association a few weeks ago, and his sporting camp is Tim Pond Camps north of Rangeley. And to get there, it was like, you drive up the highway, and then you gotta get off the main highway and you're on a dirt road with no houses for like 10 miles.
Or
You
any
know,
cell phone
and-
service.
And you literally have to then open the gate yourself to his place and then close it back up behind you and go in another 2 miles to get to his camp. Now, I don't mind, I like doing that. I'm an outdoors person, so for me, that's great. I do that all day long, but someone who's coming from New York City or Boston is like, there are no houses around. I don't have any cell phone coverage. I'm not sure I want to do that. So it's a lot about setting expectations with people when they're going to other parts of the state. And we try to promote inland. And frankly, because everyone from inland is always saying you always promote the coast, never promote us. We balance it out really well. I think we do a good job with it. It's just we don't advertise in the state of Maine much, so people never see it. They don't really know what we're doing. But but it's really important. We promote sporting camps all the time, the mountains, the hiking, the skiing, and, all the different activities. But it is tough when people are, they get a little scared going to out of the way places. And so you have to keep that in mind when you have to make sure you attract the right visitor who is willing to be off the grid for a while.
Steve, does your office also support or promote some of the events that happen in places like the Hot Air Balloon Festival in Presque Isle or the dog sled racing in Fort Kent?
Yeah.
Help promote those things too out of state?
Yep, we promote those out of state. Well, we do mostly what we do with the events. We have a PR firm we work with in the state. And what they'll do is they'll go around, gather up all the information. They'll pass that out to all the media, their media list on a monthly basis. We send out media report or call it media outreach. It's like, okay, here's the event that's happening, the Presque Isle, the Crown of Maine Balloon Festival is happening this time of year, the Lodge Festival's happening in Rockland, whatever it is, the Whoopie Pie Festival in Dover's Box Drop or whatever is happening. And we do put those out on a regular basis. And we post about that through social media. And right now, social media is one of the most effective ways to promote to people now, more so than say like television and, and print.
So are you on TikTok yet, Steve?
We're not really, the state
Fast
isn't,
growing beyond Facebook.
yeah, the state isn't really allowed to be on TikTok. The state, there are some concerns with the acts, or privacy on TikTok, and the state Office of Information Technology is.
Yeah, but all the cool kids are doing it, Steve, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I guess we're not cool, the state, I don't know, but, no.
We
But
passed a bill last session banning TikTok on all state devices, even though it was already policy, created the law.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess you better get on Instagram if you're not there yet.
Yeah, we're on Instagram, we are on Instagram and Facebook, we do Pinterest still, even though it's not as big as it once was, but we still do that. We don't really do X much, there's not, as much as we did it one time, but it's not so much a thing as much as it was.
How's your MySpace page?
I had one years ago, personally, but, yeah.
LL Bean does some great national advertising that makes us all look really good. And people also think we're all wearing plaid, but that's okay. They come,
Oh, you got your duck boots on?
they're at
All
home.
right.
Got my dressing.
So any other questions or comments?
If I know an organization that would like to promote a main event, who do they reach out to?
They would reach out to, well, I should know it off that top of it, but I don't. There's an email address that we use, like, I think it's tourism@marshallpr.com. Because Marshall Communications is our PR firm. So Nancy Marshall Communications is our PR firm that we work with, and they do all the media outreach. They're the ones that send out those monthly reports. We also will promote those things in our monthly newsletter, although we did hold off on the newsletter in last month because of the Lewiston thing. because of that risk and shooting, and I live right down the road from there, so it was, I have 8 miles from, the fair time recreation. Because of that, we paused all of our media and marketing because it wasn't appropriate for us to do any marketing during that time period. We haven't started it back up yet. Because, if you do that at the state government agency, we've seen it happen in other states where something happened and everybody's like, I can't believe the state's doing this. It's just not appropriate. And it isn't appropriate. And so, but we do, when we are sending out emails, we have a list of about 250, 300,000 people that we send to on a monthly basis. And we also have a media campaign. We spend this last year, we spent about $11 million on media, paid media. It's, and matter of fact, when I was looking at the research for planning, preparing for this, a lot of people are now seeing the media. Our budget used to be smaller. It was like $5 million on media. Now we've more than doubled that. And people are now starting to say, we're hearing the numbers in our research that says, hey, we saw something about Maine, and so it does, the advertising does work. So. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think that's a wrap. I don't know about you, but I'm a little wiped out. So we will.
Like the table?
Say, yeah. So we will, we had planned to sort of distill the group discussion and then sort of present it to folks, but we will do that via follow-up. Matt, you want to add anything? Like there will be a report, this was recorded, so.
Recorded, we'll do summary of the meeting and get it out, and, thank you all for coming. This is our first effort, with our board of directors, and I think it really was well done. And well participated, the discussion was good, and there's an awful lot of ideas around stuff that we would be taking back to our housing groups, to our KEDC, our development chair, and all sorts of things that I think are really good for this. So thank you very much, and have a safe drive home, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you for the panel.
Thank you.